I was very much hoping that we wouldn't have to close schools. I thought it was a nightmare idea. But I think it would, I think as far as I can remember, you had other countries were starting to close schools.
Yes.
And I'm surprised that the Perm Sec at the DFE didn't feel that it was necessary to look at what contingency arrangements we had.
Can I interrupt? Would you expect, running the United Kingdom as Prime Minister, would you expect the Department for Education to wait for a request for them to develop contingency plans?
No, of course not. And I think that, as I say, I think that my impression from the stuff I read was that a great deal of thought and care was already going into some of the key questions. But this is what Mr. Slater he says he had no plan ready. I think that is surprising. I seem to remember this also from the time. And one of the difficulties is my memory is now contaminated by what I've recently read. What they seem to suggest is that early on, the advice on school closures from the scientists was that it was not not necessarily a particularly effective tool of controlling the pandemic, certainly not on its own.
Do you accept that, given all of that advice from February, and notwithstanding that it was not the decision anyone had wanted to make, that there had to be planning for the possible eventuality of school closures? Because the implications were enormous.
And what I'm trying to say to you is that I believe that there was such planning. What I don't think, and clearly from what Mrs. Ackland Hood and what Mr. Slater have said, they don't feel that there was a fully worked up plan for how to deal with everything. I can't tell you now why that was the case, but I can offer at the time, don't forget that we didn't know the effect this disease had on kids. We didn't know much about the transmissibility of the disease. There were all sorts of things that were simply unknown and difficult to plan for. And the thing was moving very fast. And from the point of view of Number 10, we were focused very much on trying to stave off, trying to avoid an appalling public health crisis. And I should say that I take, because I was saying, but as I told this inquiry before, I take full responsibility for all the decisions that we took, and all mistakes that were made were mistakes that I am accountable for and take responsibility for. And insofar as we got things wrong, then of course I apologise for that, and as I've done before to this inquiry. I remain very proud, of course, of a lot of things that I think the teachers, the schools did to cope with this unbelievably difficult set of circumstances, and I think that on the whole they acquitted themselves outstandingly well. It seems to me that yes, I mean I would accept that the reality was slow to dawn on government generally about the full horror of COVID, but that's something that we've been around many times.
Sir John Cole said of Sir Gavin Williamson's evidence about school closures that he thought that it was an extraordinary dereliction of duty. So he was referring again to the lack of planning for school closures. And he said it was perfectly clear to me, as someone who was running schools, that there was a high likelihood that schools would have to close, and we were planning for that whilst, of course, doing everything we could to keep schools open. If it is right to characterise the lack of planning as a dereliction of duty, do you accept that that's a dereliction that's shared by the whole of government and not just for the not just the Department for Education?
Well, as I've tried to argue this morning, I think that the department, contrary perhaps to, it felt to me as though there had been abundant discussions about closing schools, and it felt to me, to the best of my recollection, as though the department was aware of this, and I assumed that they were planning for it. When I look at that document of March the 15th, it seems to me to suggest that a great deal of work and thought had gone into the key issues. So I'm not inclined to accept the idea that people fell down gravely in their duty. I think people were overwhelmed by the speed of events, and when the facts changed, they had to change policy, and I had to change policy.
So you don't accept that the evidence from the then Permanent Secretary that there was no contingency plan for school closures, or there wasn't planning that focused on the potential for mass school closures, you don't think that that's a dereliction of duty? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I can only repeat what I've just said.
But if I can, I think it goes to a broader question of whether children's interests were sufficiently well represented when you made those decisions, and whether you have any reflection on that now as to whether you think that's the case.
Well, I had a personal horror, as I've said, of closing schools. I thought it was a nightmare thing to do, and I thought it would do a lot of damage to people who would find it, to the life chances of people who would find it most difficult to bounce back and to cope. And so a lot of the focus of what I tried to do was to try and remediate that. I know you want to ask about that later, but to try to compensate for what we'd sadly had to do, because it felt to me as though children who were not particularly vulnerable to COVID, were paying a huge price to protect the rest of society, and it was an awful thing. As I said, I wish it had been otherwise. I wish we could have found another solution, and so we had to find a way of adjudicating on the academic achievement of the kids that didn't involve an exam, and Ofqual came up with this system. I was not expert enough to comment on it, on whether it was viable or not, but plainly it let down a lot of kids whose grades didn't reflect their abilities and their achievements. And so to answer your question, yes, I regret very much, and amongst the things I regret and I take responsibility for, is that we got the wrong initial model for how to have a substitute exam. What I would say in our defence is it wasn't easy to come up with the right model.
But you must have been concerned, Mr. Johnson, about the ministerial response to what happened after the examination results came out.
Go on.
Were you concerned, for example, that the Scottish exams came out a period of time beforehand, and that, for example, Sir Gavin Williamson hadn't used that period of time in order to, for example, develop a strategy or an understanding about what would happen when the results came out in England?
I think that my memory of this is not perfect now,
yes.
But I think it became obvious to us that the algorithm was had not worked, and it was producing lots of duff results. It was letting a lot of kids down.
But just turning to the leadership of the Department for Education, and I think we have this in your messages at INQ 000283369, page 37, and it's just at the top of that page, and it's only the message at the top of the page that matters. And it begins, we need a plan for the Department of Education, we need a perm sec, and we need better ministers. And quite frankly, we need an agenda of reform. We can't go on like this. I'm thinking of going into number 10 and firing people. Mr. Johnson, that reveals the truth, doesn't it, of what you thought about how the leadership of the Department for Education was during the pandemic.
It certainly reveals that I was in, at that particular moment when I fired off that particular intemperate message, I was in a very bad mood about what had happened. Yeah, that'd be fair.
And without going into the details of it, the permanent secretary did leave, correct?
That's correct.
But you didn't ask Sir Gavin Williamson to leave, did you?
Not then, no.
Ought you to have done?
Well, I think if I look back at the general handling of my beloved colleagues over the 3 and a bit years I was in government, I can think of all sorts of changes I might have made. But I don't think there's any point in speculating about it now. Except, I think that on the whole, given the difficulties that we faced, I think that the department under Gavin did a pretty heroic job in trying to cope with COVID, and that was my judgment.
Did you speak to young people or address them directly in order to express any regret about what had happened?
I'm so sorry. I'm sure I was interviewed about the matter repeatedly, but I cannot now remember what I said. But I'm sure I would have expressed the regret and contrition that I feel now. I mean, it was not a good system. We should not have put it through. We should have spotted it faster. I mean, I think that your criticisms are valid. All I would say is that, you try coming up with a system to give a fair exam result for people when they can't sit exams. It's not easy. Okay? That's all I would say.
It's really the broader question, Mr. Johnson, and the point has been made by other witnesses in Module 8, that you didn't, for example, have press conferences where you took questions from children or spoke to children. And I think the point has been made that...
That's a good point.
In distinction to other political leaders who did make that effort to speak directly to children, that you didn't.
Well, if that's the case, then that's a criticism, that I must accept. I mean, I remember doing lots of press conferences with young people, but I think that was before COVID. I've got to put my hands up. Maybe we should have done that.
Would you accept the reality was the government didn't consider children as rights holders in their own right and was seeing them merely through the lens of virus transmission and prioritising enforcement of the rules?
I think that you're making a fair point about the rules generally. I think that looking back on it all, the whole lockdowns, the intricacy of the rules, the rule of six, the complexity, particularly for children, I think we probably did go too far, and it was far too elaborate. And maybe we could have found a way of exempting children. It's a very fair point.
There are a number of people who've been making submissions and asking questions during the course of this module who believe, and there's a perception that the interests of children, well, generally, not just the loss of learning, weren't taken into account. Just putting that to one side at the moment, I haven't made any findings as yet. But if there were anything in that perception, as somebody who's got a lot of experience of working in government and, of course, leading the UK government as Prime Minister, could a Minister for Children, taking it as it away from just one government department, education, could a system of a Minister for Children work, and would it work?
I've thought about that, my lady, and I wondered about whether to create another ministerial function. I think another department, another set of civil servants, and so on. I have thought about it, and clearly there is an interest. We have a minister for women. We have all sorts of groups represented. I think, given how much we've heard today about the Department of Education's desire to keep proper desire to keep schools open and to represent the interests of children and young people, I think on the whole I would apply Occam's razor to this one, and just I would probably keep it with DFE. Because I think in the end the parents should be responsible for children, is what I would say. Maybe an old-fashioned view, but that's what I would say.
But the interests of children cross government departments, don't they? So, for example, detained children would be Home Office.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. Look, I'm not.
You're not.
I'm not remotely hostile to the idea. I just think you've got to think very hard before you create new departments, divisions, new roles in government. We've seen already throughout this debate, how fractious and difficult it becomes when different ministerial interests start to collide, and we've got quite enough around the table on a subject like this. That's what I would say.
That completes the questions you have for you, therefore, Mr. Johnson, and that completes the assistance that you're going to have to give the inquiry.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
I think you did that last time too. I think you're obviously in a great rush to leave me.
Sorry, it's like when the speaker stands up at the end of PMQs, you just belt for, you just run for it. That's what.
Understood. Sorry. I appreciate you didn't intend any discourtesy.
Sorry, forgive me.
No, don't worry.
Forgive me.
Anyway, thank you very much indeed for the help that you've given to the inquiry.
Jelajahi cara baru mendapatkan informasi. Download MetroTV Extend sekarang.